So this lesson is about muting bass strings at the ends of phrases or at the ends of your pieces on classical guitar. So we're going to be talking about two main techniques of muting those basses and the reasons why we would want to do that and why it's important. Follow the lesson for free and pick up all the tips, but if you're interested, you can support this channel, and there's a link for that in the description. So when we arrive at the end of a phrase or the end of a piece, especially in the classical and romantic era, there's often a cadence. So one chord going to another chord. So without getting into the music theory, we can have a 5 chord. If we're in the key of D, D, E, F, G, A. A is the 5 chord. A major going to D major. 5, 1. That's a common cadence or way to end the piece, right? So you hear that very often. Now, the issue here is that when we play pieces on the classical guitar, often the keys are chosen so that open strings are utilized in the bass quite a bit, and it makes the playing much easier for us. And so you have an open string here on the A chord and an open string on the final chord. But with open strings, they continue to ring out even after we're finished playing them. So you get this bleed of sustain over into the next chord. This A note here is still ringing out quite loud. And so we want to be able to, in some situations, to stop that sound and not have it bleed into the next chord. Because often we like to hear the final chord in its clarity, right? With the D as the lowest note. Not have this big A ringing out and then play D. Like that A is ringing out too strong. We want to actually stop the sound of the A and hear that final D. Little bit of context before I show you the two different techniques used to mute those strings. I'll give you a touch of context first. So often when we're playing, we let things ring out sometimes. The instrument, classical guitar, is quite percussive, so any new note pops out quite a bit. So we during the piece, we sometimes don't worry about muting a string or something like that. But when you arrive at a cadence, it can be important to just hear the clarity of the sound. I'll also mention that beginners probably need not worry about this very much. You have a lot of things to think about as a beginner player in terms of cleaning up the sound. But as you progress to intermediate, and especially later intermediate and advanced, you want to start refining your sound and being, the master of sound, the orchestrator, the conductor, right? You want to control the sound and not let things happen randomly because of what instrument you play, but instead you want to think about what am I hearing and why am I letting it sound like that? So let's just quickly cover the two ways of muting out this string. So one option in this particular piece that we could use is we could just play the final chord and move our thumb to the A string in close enough proximity that it stops the sound, pretty much right away. Not exactly, but pretty much. Sorry. Mute. And so the final thing the listener hears is that D chord with a D in the bass. No other notes muddying it up, right? It's just lots of clarity there. If you want to mute it even sooner though, you can use the side of your thumb by doing a deep stroke on the D, and so the side of your thumb will end up muting the A. You hear it when I plant my fingers on those strings, at that split second when I plant on the strings, the side of my thumb will mute out that A. I'm ready to play this D, but I just do a deep enough stroke with the thumb that it actually mutes that out. So it depends on how clean. Most of the time, I think you can just play the chord and put your thumb back on that string, and it's just fine. Legato means connecting one note until the next sound occurs. And so by letting that sound occur and then muting, you're making sure it's really legato and connected. So those are the two ways, though, the two options. When you put the side of the thumb in there, it can be really useful. Sometimes if you have a situation where you don't even play that note, you can do it that way, or just put your thumb back on there. Sometimes it's more difficult, though, like in this piece, it's a little awkward to get the thumb in there right away. So I might let it bleed out for the first little bit and then mute it. So there, I let it bleed into the next D, into the D chord, but on the second D chord, I mute it out just by putting my thumb back. But this would be a situation where a refined player would probably, when they played the first chord, they would put the side of their thumb in there to make sure it's muted right when we switch harmonies from A major to D, or chords, not harmonies, but chords, from the A chord to the D chord. The moment we play the D chord, that A has been muted out with the side of the thumb. Much cleaner in that situation. The previous situation, I don't think I cared very much. Like if there's a little bit of bleed, I don't really care too much, right? Like the attack of the note is strong enough, and like a little bit of bleed is okay as long as I cut it off and you just end up hearing the D at the end. Obviously, we're getting into the minutia of of really controlling the sound. So like I said, beginners need not worry too much about this. But as you get more advanced, these are the kinds of things that occur. And when you hear a professional player play, you might hear a lot of refinement and a lot of clarity in the sound of the piece. So they might be doing a lot of muting even throughout the phrase, not just at the end of a cadence or end of a piece, but throughout the entire piece they might be cutting the basses so they don't bleed into the next harmony with their sustain. So it's like a level of refinement that advanced players will actually really zero in on, depending on the context or how appropriate it is to let things sustain or not sustain. Obviously, this is another level of technique, of little technique intricacies that you'll have to think about. But I will say that if you do enough of it, your body actually does get used to it. And when I think about, even demonstrating to you in this video, there's a couple of times when I was going to demonstrate playing and then muting, but my muscle memory actually just kicked in and I muted it with the side of my thumb because it's a technique I'm used to. And so if you practice these techniques a lot, you actually don't have to think about them later. They will be part of your muscle memory, and when your ears want to hear something cut in terms of sustain, your hand will just do it. So I on one level, I'm saying it's a refined thing that will require much more concentration in the piece, and a professional player will go to lots of effort to do this. But at the same time, the professional player will have done this for a long time, and they will have, automatic habits built into their hands, which will allow them to play the piece without thinking about it very much. So my recommendation to students at the intermediate level is to start just doing it at the end of the piece. When you hear that final chord, make sure you're just hearing that final chord, and so that you can get used to doing these techniques. And then as you get more advanced, you can start doing it at the ends of lots of the phrases, or in the middle of the phrases. Like I said, also, we don't do it all the time. Sometimes we do just let things ring out because classical guitar is busy, and we're too busy with both hands to always be thinking about this or worrying about it. And the style of playing and the style of the instrument and the style of the repertoire is sometimes to let things ring. But at other times, you want to close in the sound and pick an aesthetic that is refined. So there's a lot to this, but you can start doing it at any time, especially just at the ends of your pieces.